I think dementia in particular is a really, really challenging illness because unlike things like cancer, for example, where you can all deal with that together, it's this kind of invisible disease that you can see is happening, but the person it's happening to probably doesn't see things the same way that everybody else is seeing them because they're in it. It can become a real tension point, like to try and get them to get some help for themselves without offending people or without being shut down. Like it's just a really, really tricky illness to actually be faced with yourself, with someone that you really care about.
You're listening to the Fine Answers podcast.
1, 2, 3, listen.
All right. Well, this is the Fine Answers podcast. This is a special one. This might go down as the most special podcast ever. I was thinking about how I'd introduce this one. So I do have lots of women in my life. 3 girls, 3 daughters, mum. We've got a gang of women that run the show here at Burke Britain. But there's probably 2 women that I want to talk about today. One of them's on the podcast, and it is my wife, Kari Burke. Kari, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Most welcome. The other woman whose permission we had to get to actually have this conversation is your mum, so Margie. I've talked about Margie on the podcast a lot of recent time, and again, with her permission, we'll talk a little bit about her and family. But I wanted to kind of set up the context for this, and maybe before I even do that, probably not you. This is not your first time in front of in the media. Like you were the face of Qantas for many years, but it's been a little while. It's been a little while since you've been behind the mic. So
I am a former podcaster, of course.
You are. Well, do you want to drop it?
No, it's all good. But I did do a podcast. We did a what do you call it? A season, I suppose, with one of my best friends.
You can drop her name. She's a client. It's okay. You can talk about Danny.
Okay. So yeah, Danny Stevens and I had a podcast, probably going back a couple of years now, where we talked about building businesses and running the home and all kinds of things to do with, I guess, being a mother and a woman.
Yeah. Well, that was kind of, I think that was even the genesis and like the inspiration to get this one up and running too. I think we're both launching those at about the same time. I think I've got more episodes than you now, but it's not a contest. How else did I think I wanted to set this up today? Like I'm thinking, who is this podcast for? Always thinking, like, who are the types of clients that actually listen to us, and who, like people say, who is your client base? Who is it? And I realized that it's actually us. Like if you go, who are the people that we advise on? It's families like you and I. We've got kids, we've got businesses, we've got parents, which we'll get to in a minute, and we've been colloquially talking about it as the sandwich generation, but that group of people who, they're worried about their kids, they're also having to worry about their parents. And I think anyone listening to this, hopefully they'll hear themselves in some of these conversations today. And where this conversation actually started was probably you and I having a chat with your mum about some of the frustrations of dealing with aged care and the aged care system, specifically related to your dad. So Mel, and I'll maybe set this up and then we can go back, but your dad, Mel, my father-in-law, a couple of years ago, was diagnosed with frontotemporal dementia.
Yeah, so he was officially diagnosed, I think, probably 2 years ago now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Before we get to that, and you've listened to the podcast before, Kari, so you know what we do. I'm going to let you go back as far as you want about your folks. So tell us a bit about your mum and dad, Mel and Marg. Who are they? What was your childhood like? And let's just start there.
Cool. So I probably want to go into this firstly saying I probably come from a very privileged position of having a really great relationship with both my parents, and I always have had. I understand that is not everybody's experience, but I hopefully think that some of the things that we'll share today, people around our age will relate to and maybe get something out of. But I think both you and I, Jay, are in that, like you said, that sandwich generation. We are Gen X, we've got boomer parents, and we're raising Gen Zs and Gen Alphas, I think they're called now, our little ones.
And you've got a lot of them.
Yeah, and we do have a lot of them. But if I think back to my childhood, it's funny, lately I keep seeing all these AI videos pop up on my Instagram feed about what life was like in the 80s. So I was born in 1979, but the majority of my younger childhood was in the 80s. And that really sums up that picture perfect AI video that I see is my childhood. Like, I did have just one older sister, Kim, mum and dad, middle class, I suppose you would call us. They were both school teachers living in a lovely home in Wellington. Just that picture perfect childhood in the 80s.
You had far to walk to school?
No, the school was literally right next door to our childhood home. So Dad grew up in Wellington. So he had a farmer for a father, Archie. He owned quite a lot of land in Wellington. He was a potato farmer and an orchardist. And Dad essentially, apart from a small stint when he was in teachers college and first met Mum, lived in the same street for nearly all of his life. So he was born in one particular house, then they built another house across the road. And then when my grandfather subdivided the land that he owned for his farming, he gave Mum and Dad a block as a wedding gift that was just down the road from their house. So he did not move far. It was right next to the Wellington Primary School, and that's where Mum and Dad lived. They built their home there, I think, just before my sister was born, so maybe 2 years before Kim was born. So in about 1974, I think they built it, 74, 75. And we owned that home up until 18 months ago. So really idyllic way to grow up in a semi-rural area, but still close to Geelong. Went to the Wellington Primary School, went to high school in Geelong. Mum and Dad, as I said, were both school teachers. So Dad was a school teacher at the same school for his entire career. He was at Cryo Tech, that then became different iterations of, I think it was Cryo Bay Secondary College, then...
Flinders Peak? No,
he wasn't at Flinders Peak. I don't know. He was there for his entire career. Mum did other things in the education department and worked up in Melbourne for majority of our high school years. And Dad was always very hands-on. So particularly when Mum was working up in Melbourne, Dad would be the one that was home before her. So he was probably not typical of that generation. He was a dad that he'd cook dinner sometimes. He'd do the washing. He would take Kim and I to any after-school activities. He was always a very hands-on dad our entire childhood, which I suppose was not traditional in the 80s.
Did you think everyone's parents got school holidays off?
Yes, I was very confused when I think I got my first job and they mentioned something about 4 weeks annual leave, and I went, and school holidays, right? And they said no. I said, well, everyone gets school holidays, don't they? Because that, again, was very convenient to have two parents that were school teachers. So we did lots of family holidays, nothing elaborate, like, again, that typical 80s childhood. We would go on camping holidays with, good family friends. We would go up to the Grampians. We would spend summers down at Kennett River. We'd go, I remember doing a road trip once with Mum and Dad. We drove to Canberra. That was very exciting.
Very exciting.
Very
some
exciting.
roundabouts.
Yeah. Then eventually in our teenage years, we got to go to Queensland, which was always kind of the pinnacle of holidays in the 80s. Bit fancy.
Gold Coast.
Yeah, bit posh. We drove up, and that was a fun road trip. And then Mum and Dad actually took us to Bali as well a couple of times in our teenage years, which started our family's still going love affair with Bali, and we've spent many, many holidays there. But yeah, so a really idyllic childhood. I've always been really close with my dad and my mum, but particularly with Dad growing up, like I said, he was a very hands-on dad. He, a bit like yourself, probably even more so than you, Jay, he was surrounded by women his entire life. So he was the middle child of two sisters. So he had an older sister, Sandra, and a twin sister, Julie. And his mother, he was very close with his mother, my nana, who lived next door to us our entire childhood. Again, very ideal. And my grandfather unfortunately passed away when I was just a baby, so I never got to know him. But from all accounts, he was an awesome guy that Dad was really close with. And, you know, even now, his sisters and Mum say that Dad is very much like his father, Archie, very lovable, very kind and caring sort of person. So, yeah, he always, you know, he never cared whether he had sons or daughters. He would just do all the same kinds of things with us that I suppose he would have done with sons. I remember him taking Kim and I fishing and, like I said, camping, and I'd probably usually be the one crying and carrying on because I was a
Little sook.
bit of a sook and a wuss. And but yeah, we were always doing fun things with Dad. He'd take us to the footy on the weekends, the local footy, or we would go to the Cats games every Saturday with his best friend Dave Clutterbuck and our family friends. So Dave and Heather were our family best friends growing up. So there would be Ben and James, who were their kids, and Kim and I, and Dad and Dave. After they'd finished golf on a Saturday morning, they'd take all of us kids. They'd actually drop us off early at Cardinia Park so that we could go in and bags a seat on the
Did you
front.
jump the fence, or did you pay to get in?
No, we paid $2 to get in, and we would have, because there was no reserve seating back then. It was, you know, first in, best dressed. So they'd drop us off there early, and I think they'd go to the pub or something. We'd get the good seat, and then they'd come in and reap the benefits of us sitting there. But those kinds of memories and those holidays and spending time with family friends, like, I just really cherish. Like, it was just such a great childhood.
Yeah. And well, when did I come in the scene? Probably 20 years ago. Is that right? 20?
Yeah.
Yep.
21 now.
Yep. And I mean, I can say after 20 years, I don't think there is a male role model figure in my life that I would look up to more than your dad. Like the loyalty, just the way he functions in life. He's an unreal guy.
Yeah.
Like, he's a caring dad, unbelievably loving husband, and both him and your mum, I was thinking about this, just how much they've supported us, and how, like you said, that it was kind of middle class upbringing, but they were, you know, financially independent. They managed their affairs themselves, and gave their kids plenty of experiences. And when other people came into their orbit, like myself as a random son-in-law, they offer the same level of love and support, which I'm forever grateful for. Maybe I just want to talk about that sort of support that you folks have offered us, because I think this is where we start to talk about how that support ends up getting, the need for that support ends up needing to be returned to them. Maybe you touched on Mel's mum. Maybe just talk about that as maybe some of the early indications of what life looks like as you progress. So talk about your nan who just lived up the road.
Yeah, so as I said, we lived next door to my nana, so Margaret Smith. We always laugh because Mum and her have the same name. So she lived next door to us, literally a 2-minute walk up the road down there in Wellington, and we were always very close with Nana. Nana was a very independent lady, so she lost her husband pretty young. So Archie was only 67 when he died, and Nana was a little bit younger than that. But
I thought he was younger than that.
No, he was 67.
Okay.
So he died of a stroke, and Nana was incredibly independent, particularly for a woman of that generation. She was very social. It's funny now looking back, I can see so many of my dad's traits. As I didn't know Archie, but so many of Dad's traits also came from Nana. So she was always very social. She was in the bowls club. She played bridge. She had lots of friends. She never really had any interest in finding another partner after Archie was gone. But she was always out there doing things, living her life, which again was just normal for us. I didn't know any different, but I know that's not the case for a lot of older people, particularly if they lose their partners. And we were always really close with her. And I would probably about when I was a teenager, I think, Nana decided that she wanted to sell her Wellington home. It was starting to get a little bit big for her because she had about an acre or two still there. So it was getting a bit much for her to manage. So she built this unit down in Ocean Grove, and that was all very exciting when Nana built the unit. And she moved down there. That's where a lot of her friends were. And then, again, I can't exactly remember the time frame of when it happened, but Nana started to get a little bit forgetful, and some things started happening around driving. I think, again, my memory is a little bit blurry about it, but there may have been an incident where she was disorientated in her car. I would have to check with Mum, but some things started to happen, and it was becoming apparent to us that Nana was not doing so well. And it turned out that Nana did have dementia. So that's something that we're going to talk about today. I suppose dementia, it's the broader term for all kinds of different, cognitive
decline.
And they never really, back then they didn't really specify what kind of dementia a person had, but Nana had dementia. And eventually she did end up having to go into care, which she went into up in Ballarat near Dad's twin sister Julie, and she passed away in that care facility. She would have been in her late 80s. So she did still live quite a long life, but yes, she declined quite rapidly. And I can remember at that age finding it really difficult to go and see Nana after being so close with her growing up. This person that was in this care facility was sort of just a shell of that woman that I knew. So it did. And then I always held a lot of guilt around not going to see her more often, which again is something I want to talk about today with more life experience and hindsight. My sister and I had a conversation about Nana, and my sister was overseas, I think, for quite a big portion of the time that Nana was in care, and so she just by default didn't really get to see her much. And in some ways she's grateful for that, because her memories of Nana are still, I guess, pure, and the Nana that we grew up with and the Nana that we knew. So yeah, it's interesting how you can look at things differently. But yeah, so that's what happened with my Nana. And that, I think she passed away when I was pregnant with Sadie.
Well, I remember being in Ballarat. Willow was maybe 12 months old when we went to Ballarat, and your mum would come out of care, because I didn't meet your Nana really in the capacity that you knew her. I knew her when she was in care. So we sort of start to fast forward a little bit. I mean, having had that experience with Mel's mum, let's maybe fast forward to, I don't know, would you say 4 or 5 years ago? And we start to talk about some of the early signs that your mum, we may have noticed, and maybe sometimes with the benefit of hindsight, we start to realise what those signs were. So maybe talk to that.
Yeah, so I've always, as I said, been really close with Mum and Dad, and that probably grew when Jay and I got together and we started to have kids. And so we have spent a lot of time with both of them. We've been on lots of family holidays together. They would be at our house at least a couple of times a week, talk to Dad and Mum on the phone most days. So had a really good, I guess, overview of where they were at always, like within their health and mental capacity. It's not like there was ever any point in our lives that we didn't see them often. And it was probably Dad. I probably should mention too that Dad, again, hindsight's interesting. Dad has always probably had a tendency to be an anxious person. We didn't recognize that that's what it was growing up. It was always a bit of a running joke. Dad always thought if you were on time to something, you were late, or, he was always very much about, we've got to get there, or we were in the car, or like, and
got to get there so we can get home.
Yeah. So a lot of those Malisms that we used to hang shit on him about, you look back now and sort of can recognise with today's lens that he's always had some anxieties. And I think what we started to notice first with Dad, I can remember 2019. I've got that year in my memory of when we really started to notice but those anxieties were becoming a bit more intense, so more than Dad's regular anxiety. And I think that probably became apparent when him and Mum went on a trip to Spain. So traveling for them, it was not a new thing. They have travelled extensively over the last few decades. They've been overseas many, many times all over the world. So they've been to Canada, America, Europe, Asia. They've done heaps of travel. So travel wasn't something that...
And social travel too.
Social travel. So not that something they weren't familiar with. They did a lot of travelling and were comfortable doing that kind of thing. But they planned this particular trip to Spain with two of their great lifelong friends, Janine and Alan, who have lived in Canada for decades now. They used to live just up the road from us in Wellington, and they moved to Canada, must have been probably in the early 90s, late 80s. And they'd planned this trip and things just weren't kind of going to plan. And Dad became very anxious and very agitated and wanted to come home mid-trip, which for my dad, that was really out of
Unusual.
character. Yeah, like Dad, we say, Dad's always been really good with his money. We hang shit on him that he's a tight ass. He's not a tight ass in the sense he's a very generous tight ass, but he's always been really careful with his money.
Doesn't like wasting money.
He doesn't like wasting money. So for him to want to cut a trip short halfway through and know that it was going to cost him a significant amount of money to get home was really out of character. And that's what happened. He got on the phone to my sister. So my sister actually used to be a travel agent, and she organised for them to get out of there early, and they came home, and that's when we sort of started to notice that things weren't quite right with Dad. Just little things would start to happen where he would forget how to do something, or he would start to withdraw socially, like from friends. And Dad's always been an incredibly social person. So I was trying to think of words to describe Dad. He is a very outgoing person, but not in like a loud. He's not a big presence in that way, but he was always incredibly outgoing and social and interested in people, and always had like core groups of friends. He's golfed his whole life. He used to be in a cards group. He had a wine club. Like he's always been social with his friends. And that's something I've always admired about him and Mum. They always maintained their own personal friendships outside of each other, but then they'd come together and they'd have their friends together and do things. So they were always doing things. So again, that was really unusual that all of a sudden Dad was becoming less and less interested in doing anything like that. And again, in hindsight, it's probably a bit of that self-preservation. If you're feeling yourself start to slip a little bit mentally, maybe you're wanting to protect yourself. I'm not really sure, but
the one that sticks in my mind is the golf, because every time we went to Bali, like we would golf, and your dad played the competition or pennant golf or whatever it was. He'd play every week, so he'd probably play 1 or 2 times a week. And I know how pissed off he was with me when remember at that time he couldn't play golf, and he transferred his membership to me for 6 months, and I didn't use it once. So he loved his golf, and you could just notice that he wasn't as interested in it, which was actually unusual. And I remember thinking at the time, I think I might have said it, I said, I think that might be the early signs of him forgetting some of his friends' names. And he was aware and conscious of the fact that he should know or remember his mates' names. And so that withdrawal is probably that symptom.
Yeah, and I think it was probably always in the back of my mind, and I'm sure his. He watched his own mother go through this. I'm sure he probably did always think this potentially could come for me as well. So and Dad is a very proud man, and I think of lots of people of that generation, it can be really hard to admit that, maybe some things are starting to slip. I remember saying to Mum once, I can't remember how old I was, but I remember saying to her once, what does it feel like to be a grown-up? What does it feel like when you're a grown-up? And she said, I don't feel any different than when I was a kid. And that's always stuck in my mind. And I thought that probably continues to be that way as you get older. You don't really think like I'm an old person now or an older person in these things. You're still in your brain. You're still just that same person. So there probably was a little bit of denial going on for Dad and definitely for Mum, and not in a, I think it comes from a place of just not wanting it to be true.
Mm.
So not in a trying to cover for him or cover it up, but it's that not wanting it to be true. So kind of justifying things and going, no, it's, she'll be right. I think, again, that's something of that generation. She'll be right. Don't be silly. I'm fine. There's nothing wrong with me.
Mm. I know it sticks it when you said pride. Your mum said to me a few times, she goes, Mel's a very proud man. And I think there's definitely that element, whether it be subconsciously or consciously, of your mum being very conscious of just how proud an individual your dad is and wanting to protect him. I know there was a few moments, like as kind of things progressed, the things that sort of stick in my mind were around his driving. Maybe talk to that, and moving up to the point where he was formally diagnosed, which again is not that long ago.
Yeah.
What were the other things? So the reason we say this is that for those people that are out there listening, and I've had this conversation with clients before where they go, yeah, that's exactly the experience we had. They're the signs, the anxiety, the withdrawal. What's the benefit of knowing that? Well, it allows you to provide support earlier.
Yeah. And I think it's really important, to people maybe that are listening to this that have parents around the same age, like not tread lightly, but just be sensitive around these things. I think dementia in particular is a really, really challenging illness because unlike things like cancer, for example, where you go to the doctor, they tell you what's wrong, you can all deal with that together. It's this kind of invisible disease that you can see is happening, but the person it's happening to probably doesn't see things the same way that everybody else is seeing them because they're in it. And it can become a real tension point, like to try and get them to get some help for themselves without offending people or without being shut down. Like it's just a really, really tricky illness to actually be faced with yourself, with someone that you really care about.
The other thing that came to mind then around tension was getting the support. Again, podcast is not about shit canning anyone, but just how challenging it was to get the right level of support from general practitioners. Like you think, well, these people are trained to be over the top of this. A lot of them, they're not as close to the situation as you are, as a family member or as a partner.
Yeah. And that is definitely what was happening. So your doctor, even if they've been your doctor for a long time, they're seeing you for 5 minutes in their clinic, and people can become very, very clever, which my dad did, become very clever at masking. And I know the same thing would happen with Nana. I know Mum has spoken to me about those early days with Nana and taking her into appointments, and they can be very, very good at masking so the doctor doesn't actually realise the gravity and the extent of what's actually going on for that person. So, yeah, you have to be, I guess, have the courage to maybe be the person that might cop it from one or both of your parents to say, hey, we need to get some help here and we need to get this checked out because, like you said, with the things can start to happen where it's not just about the safety and care of the individual going through it. It might be the general public. So a big thing around just aging in general, but particularly people with dementia, is driving. So driving can become very dangerous, and we started to see signs of Dad forgetting how to drive. And he was, I think we were going on a trip to Bali, and he sort of ran into the ditch and he forgot how to reverse, and there was just a few things happening. And again, that's a very, very sensitive subject to bring up with somebody who is a very, very proud person.
Independent,
but it gets to a point where you can't risk other people getting hurt. So you have to be able to be the one that might cop it, but you have to be able to be the one that can.
Can you remember what we did? Did we speak to Vic Rhodes? Did we?
Yes. So we did with, between Mum, my sister and I, sort of trying to work out the best way forward, because speaking with Dad about it was no longer really an option. And I don't know whether we spoke to somebody else maybe that had been through a similar experience, and they suggested that you can actually it was a lady from Dementia Australia. So I spoke with a really, really lovely lady who came over to our house and sat with Mum and I, and just went through some strategies of things we could do with someone that was kind of not willing to get any help themselves. And she suggested that you can contact Vic Rhodes anonymously and report that somebody is potentially unfit to drive, and then they'll
Send them a letter.
Yeah, they send them a letter. So my sister volunteered to be the one to do that, which was like a really difficult thing. You don't want to betray your dad, but it does get to the point where it was the right thing to do. And so, yeah, that was probably one of the first big steps in that decline of Dad was, when his license was taken away from him. But it was the right thing to do. And, Mum and my sister and I all agreed on that. So we had to do what was going to be best for everyone. We didn't want Dad getting hurt, and we didn't want somebody else getting hurt, because, again, I think when you can have an overview of it and think the dad that is not going through this, he would want us to do this. He would hate to live with the fact if he hurt somebody, or so you've got to be able to, I guess, sometimes remove yourself from the situation and take the emotion out of it and just do what is best for everybody.
Let's talk about the formal diagnosis. So going from talking to the GP, challenges, Mel sort of masking and doing a good job of diverting, to going and seeing a gerontologist, I think it was.
A geriatrician.
Geriatrician, sorry. Yep.
Yeah, so that took a while to actually get an appointment with, like a lot of specialists. It's a process to go through. You have to get referrals from your GP, and we eventually did get in to see the geriatrician, who they do all kinds of different tests, but even that can be really confronting. So it was Mum, Dad and myself that went to that appointment, and the geriatricians don't mess about. Like, they'll sit there and ask questions in front of Dad about Dad, which that very first appointment, like for Mum, was really, really difficult. She felt like she was betraying her husband, and there were things that she would diminish and almost cover for, and I can just see it was from a place of not wanting to upset Dad. So I think, it's really important probably in those situations, if you do have like an older person in your life going through this, to make sure that there is that third person in there that can be the bad guy, I suppose. That was my role in that scenario, to be the bad guy, to say, no, this is actually what's going on. And yeah, it didn't take very long. They did some scans on Dad's brain and different tests and stuff, and he was diagnosed with frontotemporal dementia, or otherwise known as FTD, which is a pretty aggressive form of dementia. So the main types of dementia that most people will be familiar with is Alzheimer's. That's probably the biggest one. And Alzheimer's is a bit more of a slow progression into forgetfulness, but FTD is quite aggressive. So it does affect that front part of your brain that controls things like your personality, your inhibitions, just knowing how to do things that we all take for granted. And they were things that we had started to see change in Dad. So Dad was always a very social person. So we mentioned that, and that changed pretty quickly. He no longer wanted to socialise with anyone. Dad was always a very, stoic, I suppose. Stoic, he was always very respectful. He was never anyone that would be, I don't know the right word to use, sleazy or
inappropriate.
Just like, and it just wasn't his nature. He was always just a very kind, like I've never heard anybody say anything bad about my dad. Like
I challenge anyone to
like he's
come
just
at
the
me with
best guy. And I know I'm biased, but like he's just he's someone that was always very interested in other people. He's just an awesome guy. So those kinds of things were probably the most confronting, because those changes started to happen where Dad, he just started to behave completely differently to what any of us were used to. And it was.
Can you remember any examples?
So like I said, he's never been an inappropriate person ever, and just started to, I think we're in Bali, and, you know, he would want to take pictures of girls in bikinis, and that would just, he would be mortified by that, like on all these different things. And you sort of, in the moment, you're almost like laughing because you're like, what's happening here? Like, and it's like you revert back to being a toddler almost, like just having no filter, no sense of awareness that is inappropriate. Like that was the most challenging thing, because it wouldn't even be like if you said to him, you can't do that, Dad, or you can't say that, he would just sort of look at you blankly. Like, and again, those things were really hard for all of us to see, because, and for some people, they can become aggressive. Dad didn't become physically aggressive, but as the decline in his condition started to happen, he was getting very agitated and a bit erratic. He was very confused about his surroundings, about where he was. And
generally your mum was probably the brunt of most of that.
Yeah, so poor mum, the person that she has loved for 50 plus years, like it's been her kind, caring husband, he was taking everything out on her, not physically, but, you know, he's this personality change, and she's trying to care for him and love him and doesn't want this to be happening. That's really hard to watch. And again, sometimes you can be very good at covering up the real picture of what's going on, because like we saw them a lot, but we weren't living with them every day. And it wasn't until we had a stint where they did come to stay with us, where you really do see the, I guess, enormity of the situation of what is actually happening. And it feels like it declined pretty fast. I mean, it went from 2019 to 2023, was it 2023 or 24 when he got his diagnosis? 24, I think the end of 2023, so it was just before Christmas. So it was a long time in between when he started to go downhill for a diagnosis, and then it really declined fast.
Well, just on that, let's talk about that decision to move. So being in the Wellington home for pretty much ever, talk about that period of time post-diagnosis and then the decision to move from Wellington, just how things progressed from there for where your mum and dad would ultimately live.
Yeah. So mum was always wanting to move somewhere else, like just to try something different, but dad was pretty much going to be buried in the backyard of that home. That was his home. He had no interest in living anywhere else. Like I said, he travelled extensively. He was an adventurous person in that way, but he loved his home, and he just didn't have any interest in moving anywhere. And probably would have been before the diagnosis, but he was starting to become confused in his own home. So he had lived in that particular house for 50 years, 40-something years, and he kept trying to pack up the car and saying that he wanted to go home and wanted to go home to the Wellington house. And when those things started to happen, we thought maybe this is an opportunity to move somewhere new. Mum and I had been talking about the different options of not assisted living, what do you call it, like lifestyle villages. So Mum was really open to that. We'd looked at one a couple of years prior, but Dad wasn't interested in entertaining that idea. But as the conditions started to progress, we landed on Bellarine Lakes in Moolap, beautiful lifestyle village there. And
9-hole golf course.
yeah, 9. So we thought Dad would love that. And I think by that point, Dad was sort of just going along with whatever. He wasn't really fighting it anymore. His condition had progressed, but we thought this will be much safer for both of them. They've got other people around. You know, if Mum needs some help, there's people there. They're not as isolated as they were out in Wellington. And so decided that that's what we'd do. They found a unit that they liked. All of that was good, and decided we'll sell the house. We'll put the house on the market. And like that was a pretty emotional thing for all of us. Like no one else has ever lived in that house. That's been our childhood home. It's been the hub of our family, Christmases, lots of memories tied up in it, but we knew it was the right thing to do. So we sort of started the process of that with, we got a real estate agent in and did all the things that you do to put a house on the market. I can't even remember what year it was. It must have been 2024, which was when the housing market was starting to go down.
Come back off after the
big
peak
boom
of COVID, yeah.
Yeah, and the interest rates were going up, and it ended up being like a lot more of a challenge than we realised. And it was a really unique sort of property. Like most of the properties in their area is on acreage. Theirs was on, a smaller block. So there wasn't a lot of, I guess, guidance on what they could expect to get for the home. It was pretty stressful, and we decided that it would be best to move them out while we were selling the house so that the real estate agent could show the house and have it looking all nice. And so they came to stay with us, and that started to go on for a lot longer than we realised. They were with us for a couple of months, and it didn't look like it was selling anytime soon. So they moved back into the home, and then eventually we did sell it, probably for less than what we were initially told we would get for it, but it was the right thing to do. And they moved into the lifestyle village in December of 2024.
One of the other things that was happening around that time too was we're thinking about how we get some support in the home. So we remember we started that process of actually getting through My Aged Care. Maybe just talk to that, because the way I think about this is that you think about all these decisions. Like you think about all the decisions that, let's say it's your mum alone or your dad were having to make around sale of a property. How do I fund into a lifestyle village? Mel's deteriorating. How do I get support? Where does that support come from? And just how, like, I'm a financial advisor. We've got a gang of people that support in this. And even in our situation, we weren't immune to those challenges. So the My Aged Care, I can't remember exactly the timeline, but I want to say that it was something in the order of like 12 months. Essentially, Mel and Mark didn't end up getting any support in the home. Like they were actually approved for support in the home when they'd finally moved into Ballerine Lakes.
Yeah, because we did initially we thought, maybe if we can get enough support for Dad at home, ideally you want to be able to keep somebody in their own home, and that was sort of our first goal, was let's try and do this. But like Jay said, it's a pretty difficult system to navigate. Like you might get approval, but then there's no service providers to actually get the help, or like it's just like most.
Or you wait 6 months even just to have a phone call to get assessed.
Yeah. So all that process, the assessment, and you have to really be like on their back. Like you can't sit back and wait for someone to come to you. You've got to have someone that's advocating for your parents or, the old people in your life, because it is a bit of a shit show. Like it's probably under fund. I don't know. I'm not sure. I'm not the financial advisor here, but it's not an easy system. It's not like you can just call up one day and get help. And much like most people in that situation, you don't have 12 months to wait. Like we needed the help for Dad now. Like we needed for it to be effective and an option to keep him at home. We needed to have people coming in. And it was just a very, very long process, and it was exhausting. And like Jay said, by the time we eventually got approved, Dad was rapidly declining, and it was no longer an option for him to stay at the home. Well, we probably didn't know that yet, but he was starting to get very erratic at the new property. So they'd only been there about
A month, I reckon.
I think. And he was wandering. Mum really couldn't leave his side for probably a couple of years. She couldn't even go to the supermarket, nothing on her own.
I would say even to the bathroom.
Yeah. She had to constantly be with him. And I can't remember exactly what happened, but I had found out through my aged care that you can do like a respite stay in somewhere to give mum a bit of a break. I didn't really know how that worked. I wasn't sure if you go in there for a couple of days or what the process is, but I started the ball rolling at Ballerine Lakes Bupa because the whole reason that we chose that particular lifestyle village was because it did have an aged care facility attached to it, so that when and if the time came,
with a dedicated dementia wing.
Yeah, that it would be convenient for mum. And so I started the ball rolling with them, and they explained that respite is a minimum of 2 weeks and that your loved one comes in. And I think at the time Dad we'd had a few MRIs done, and we realised that Dad had actually had a few strokes, which was that was why the decline sort of was happening so fast. And there might have been something else going on medically. So we kind of, under the guise of, the doctor just wants you to be monitored, because he wasn't very willing to do many things that we wanted him to do at this point. But we did manage to get him in there fairly uneventfully in the beginning to the respite, and it wasn't until he was in there that the carers were the ones that actually said that he needs to be in here full time. And that was, I suppose, when the enormity of it all became apparent of just what Mum had been dealing with this whole time. And again, when you're living in it, it's hard to see it for what it is. So it was a blessing in disguise, but a very, very difficult decision. I think we just kept extending the respite out, because you can extend it up to
90 days.
60 or 90 days, something like that. And so we just kept doing that. And then
Probably 60, yeah.
Again, I can't remember the exact moment, but we sort of collectively, Mum and my sister and I, realised that it was the right thing to do, that he needed to stay in there.
So in the space of, I don't know, it's 6 months, we've got the sale of their family home, contracts, markets, contracts on the buying into a new retirement village, trying to navigate my aged care services, then actually into aged care. All of these have their own complexity. And this probably brings us to Mel actually formally finishing respite, and then, signing contracts to get him into permanent aged care. And the next decision for Margie is, how the hell am I going to pay for all of this? Like, how am I actually going to fund Mel into care? And so maybe talk about that process and, what that looks like for Margie and you who are dealing with it. And we'll get to what we've learned, but just what that experience was like in terms of just the formalities of it, let alone the emotional side of getting Dad in there.
Yeah, well, I think, Mum's got a son-in-law that's a financial advisor, which most people probably won't have. For the average person trying to navigate that, I would suggest would have no idea of how it works. Like, I had no idea individually how it worked. Although Jay had dealt with it, probably Delta is more the aged care specialist in this practice. So, yeah, you learn a lot very fast of what it's like to deal with. Oh, and I just want to touch on too, just quickly, I just thought of it too, and I think what hopefully will make this podcast beneficial to other people. We had run into a really good friend of ours, maybe a month or two before Mum and Dad had moved, or I can't remember the exact timeline, but she was going through the same thing with her dad, and she was dealing with my aged care. And it was her that actually gave me so many tips, things that I wouldn't have known and that Jay wouldn't have even known, about how to deal with my aged care, to try and, because her father, who has dementia, was getting quite a lot of support in the home. But again, she'd gone through it and it had taken her a really long time. So she gave me some really helpful advice about what to do and what to say, and even just little tips. And I found that really helpful. So talking to other people that have been through it would be my first tip for people if you are going through something like this with one of your parents, talking to others, because so many people are going through it as well. So that, I just remembered that then. But yeah, I honestly can't even really remember exactly how it all went down with getting Dad in there. I know it's tested based on assets and it's not just like it costs this much to come into this care facility. It doesn't work that way. It depends on what you have individually, whether your partner is still living in your home, what assets you have, if you have income, pensions, all of those kinds of things. So it is important probably to speak to someone that knows what they're talking about, because that part was really eye-opening of that it's not very straightforward of getting someone into a care facility. Have you got any additional things on that?
Yeah. So again, we've done some podcasts on the sort of the detail of sort of basic daily care fees, RADs or refundable accommodation deposit, DAPs. But the thing that, this is probably what sort of prompted these conversations initially, was when you go into a facility like Mel did, the intent for yourself and your sister and your mum is, I want him looked after. And so they'll put a contract in front of you, and that contract includes all of the stuff that is means tested. But there's also, every facility has, well, how would I describe it? Additional services packages, and in there it's sort of the bells and whistles of what people will actually receive. And most family members will just sign it, and they'll go, I want the best care for my family member. But if I fast forward now to sort of 12 months, 18 months after Mel having gone into care, one of the things that had come up was that Margie just kept getting these significant direct debits from her bank account. So all of a sudden she'd have a backdated amount owing, and it was never really clear. And this is probably a symptom of the how bad the means tested system is and how long it takes. So when someone goes into care, it can take 12 months before all the means testing assessment is done and you actually know what it actually costs for someone to be in there. And so if people aren't careful, they're either overpaying or underpaying.
It's probably similar to like Centrelink, isn't it?
Well,
it's up to you to initially to go, that's not right.
Correct. And anyway, so Margie had these lump sums, and Margie not flushed with funds, so independently, financially under control. But when you have like a couple of $1,000s in a month come out that you didn't expect, it was significant, and that prompted us to start to look at what was actually going on. And probably the main one, and this has probably been again, so it's definitely a learning for us as financial advisors to actually push a little bit more on the types of service that someone actually has, is actually going to benefit from and actually has the capacity to benefit from.
Yeah.
So there has been some changes. I won't get bogged down in this as of November of last year, but historically you go into an aged care facility and the bells and whistles package that was provided by the facility was kind of all or nothing. So you either accepted it and took on board everything. In this example, the package, it might have been sort of $15,000 of additional services, and Margie's paying that to make sure that Mel gets the best service he possibly can. What became very apparent is that the majority of those services on there, Mel not only wasn't making use of, but he didn't have the capacity to make use of. And again, this is not a criticism of the facility, just a criticism maybe of the system, is that no one's actively looking at that. It's the family that actually needs to be proactive and have a look at that. So maybe it's a bit of a long-winded entry into that area, but maybe talk about from your experience, because you've been the one that's sort of borne the brunt and actually finally resolved a number of those issues. What happened from your perspective, and how did you resolve it?
Yeah, and I think it's important to note too, like most aged care facilities have different areas. So there's one end of the facility that Dad's in that is for people that just need care, but they're not cognitively impaired. So they might still be fine in many ways, but they just need to be looked after. And so a lot of the extra things that these facilities offer can be great for people that are going to get benefit out of them. And like Jay said, when you're going through the emotions of making the decision to put your loved one into a care facility, there's so much emotion tied up in it that of course you just want them to have the best of everything. And you have no crystal ball, or you have no real understanding of what they're going to have the capacity to actually get any kind of benefit out of. And it's just important to make sure that you're staying on top of it as their care progresses, because Dad, when he initially went through a really challenging period. At the beginning, he didn't want to be there. He kept trying to escape. He kept trying to call us and wanted to come home. And it was very, very, again, emotional and confronting. And then again, his decline happened probably more rapidly being in the facility, which is not uncommon. And it was probably within the first couple of months that most of those things that we had signed up for Dad were no longer appropriate for him. But neither Mum or I, or probably even you, Jay, wasn't even in our minds. We were just focused on, is Dad comfortable? Is he settled? Are they looking after him? Are they showing him, care and respect? And all of those things were true. So the carers in the facility that Dad is in are beautiful. They are so kind to Dad. Now, after quite a long time, he is settled. He doesn't try and leave anymore. All of those things that you can hope for when you have to put someone into care were being met, and we just didn't even really think about those other things until, as Jay said, we were starting to get these bills coming through and started to dig a little bit deeper. But yeah, it's really hard to separate your emotions from being pragmatic and advocating for your parents and doing what's right. It can be a challenge, but sometimes taking that off the plate of your parents is the best gift that you can give them, to just for them to know, that's what I keep thinking, Mum and Dad cared for me my whole life, and now that's what is my privilege to do the same for them, to make sure that they're getting the best care.
This idea of advocating, which I think you've kind of nailed, and which extends from the pragmatic and the financial through to the sort of emotional support. It's really hard to explain. Even when I was talking to clients, it's very hard to explain just what's coming at you, and just how much everyone, whether it be us as Gen Xers, be our boomer parents, there's a lot coming from all angles. And a lot of the messaging that we have in this podcast, I said right at the beginning that most of the stuff that I advise on is a reflection of the personal experiences that I've had, whether it be, with family, with loss, with, in-laws and people going into aged care. And so we're not immune to it. And what we want to do is make sure that people have an understanding that they're not alone. I mean, there is support out there. Doesn't mean that it's not going to be challenging, but there are things that you can sort of proactively do and be aware of in advance that can set you up. And hopefully, you can learn. You can learn from you can hear some of the themes in our conversation, and you can apply it to your own circumstances. Maybe as we kind of wrap up, if you had to kind of summarize what you have learned from the entirety of this experience, which again continues, what is it? And how would you suggest that other people think about being in a similar circumstances as you and your mum and your sister?
Yeah.
And your dad?
I think, and again, this is hindsight's great, but if you are in a position to have conversations with your parents, for example, when they're still got all their capacities about what they would like and what that looks like for them, so you can have some kind of understanding of their wishes. That's probably something, we never did with Dad. I've had those conversations since with Mum. We've had those conversations with your mum, about, what do you want to happen in the case? Like sometimes I think we all want to hope for the best and we all want to think that everything's going to go to a certain plan, but most of the time it doesn't. So actually having some difficult conversations with family members about what they would like to happen for them and having some things in place so that it does make it a little bit easier. I think being patient with your family members. I know for so many people, like ourselves included in this generation, you've got this to deal with, plus you've got your own kids, you've got your own lives going on. Sometimes, like your siblings, for example, might not all be living in the same area or might just not have the capacity to be able to take things on. One thing I'm really proud of with my sister and I is there's no animosity about who's doing what, and we both have different things to bring to the table in regards to supporting our parents, having extra things on top of that and being angry at each other of who's doing what just adds to the difficulty of what's already a shit situation. With anything, I guess it's cliche to say, but spend time with the people that you love while you can. That's one thing that, both Mum and I have talked about is what's happening with Dad is so shit. It's like mourning someone that's still alive because the Dad that we know he's gone. But we don't have any regrets. Both, for Mum, they've lived such an awesome life. They've travelled, and same with us. We've done so much with Mum and Dad. They've come on so many family trips with our kids. Our kids have got so many special memories with Pa. And another thing, if this is helpful for anyone, because I think one of the biggest things you'll feel, particularly with someone with dementia, there can be a lot of guilt around, because it's really hard to go and see them. It is really hard. And so with our kids, I don't push them to do that. I want them to have those memories intact with Dad and I. I find it really hard because every time I go to see him, it's I forget a little bit more about what he was like before. So, and again, Mum and Kim and I have all, said to each other, there's no pressure. You go and see him as much or as little as you want to. There's no one's getting mad at anyone about that because it's everyone's personal experience about how they can handle that. And there can be a lot of guilt wrapped up in that sort of stuff. So just try and let that go. I know that's easier said than done. But just tell people you love them when you can, I guess.
All the other things I had in don't seem very relevant after that. I'd enjoy every moment. Don't wait for shit to go sideways before you start conversations.
I have to say, I have one beautiful cousin who's done a lot of work with people in dementia wards, and she said sometimes you just got to laugh. Sometimes they say and do some really funny shit, and if you don't laugh, you'll cry. So we often laugh. Dad doesn't really, there's not much conversation going on anymore when you go to see him. But a bit of a running joke in our family is that he likes Jay better than he likes my sister and I. Jay is his favourite son. He was always so proud to have this son-in-law. And not long ago, Kim and I were in there, and I don't think he had any clue who we were really. And we were sitting there, and he said, "How's Jay going?" We thought, well, yeah, that's typical. So there has to be those moments of light where you can just have a laugh at what is a really shit situation. But yeah.
Well, I think one of the things that if I've got any regrets. I mean, obviously I'm Mel's favourite, and had the pleasure of being in his life for the last 20 years. One of the things I do regret, I remember taking this podcast equipment to Bali and thinking, actually, I'm going to turn the mics on and get some stories out of Mel. So what I hope from this, outside of anyone else being able to actually listen to this and hear themselves and their family in this story, I just love the fact that you've been able to sit and talk about your dad, and this will stand as a record of how much love you have for your dad, how great an individual he is, and so I know this is probably long overdue conversation. I'm glad we could do it. I'm glad we decided to actually do it. So I'm sure it's of value to people out there, but I loved every bit of it. So thanks, babe.
Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you're keen to understand more about how financial advice could benefit you, follow us on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter at Burke Britain FP, or Google Burke Britain Financial Partners to check out our client reviews, testimonials, and make a time to meet one of our certified financial planners by clicking Book Now on our website. Thanks for listening. Any information contained in this podcast is of a general nature only. No account was taken as to the objectives, financial situation, or needs of any particular person. Therefore, before making any decisions, listeners should consider the appropriateness of any information with regard to their particular objective, situation, or needs, and seek advice from a licensed professional specific to their circumstances. PB Financial Solutions Proprietary Limited, trading as Burke Britain Financial Partners, are authorised representatives of Acumen Financial Planning, ABN 89051208 327, Australian Financial Services Licence 232706.